It's always an achievement for a movie to make $1 billion. So far this decade, we had 9 movies to cross that milestone. So here's my ranking for all 9 of those movies for this decade so far. I still cannot believe that Jurassic World Dominion was able to cross $1 billion. This movie to me is a complete disaster. Now this is also coming from someone that actually enjoyed Fallen Kingdom. But Dominion was basically the worst of what these Jurassic World movies could be. The plot is way too confusing. For a Jurassic World movie, your plot is about some bugs, DNA stuff, and just overall not about what the Jurassic franchise should be about. The original Jurassic Park movie was about, the power shutting down, these dinosaurs getting out. That's what Jurassic franchise is. Jurassic World even had a similar plot, but still kept the Jurassic World theme to it. Fallen Kingdom was where it started to change. We got DNA type storylines, but the beginning of it was still type Jurassic World stuff. But then when we get to Jurassic World Dominion, we had a very interesting storyline of the dinosaurs being out in the wild. Who knows what's going to happen? That right there is an interesting premise to sell me. And then, you're also bringing back the original cast too. It could have been something. But what do we get instead? A 2.5-hour movie that's nothing of what I just mentioned. Of all the ways you could have ended off this trilogy, this was the worst possible way to do it. And it's because of this movie that I am not excited for the new Jurassic World movie coming out. That movie jumped right into production right when this movie came out. And it's just, for a new trilogy of movies, we're jumping right into it. And just because of this movie alone, brought down my excitement for that movie. But hope it's better. Now every day on Twitter, I saw that this movie was getting closer and closer to hitting $1 billion. And then at last it finally did. And I was disappointed because this movie wasn't great. The best way I've been describing Moana 2 is everything you loved about the first movie, but taken away. This movie was originally going to be a show, and you can obviously tell. Plot points in here, character development is not really there. Plot is kind of rushed, but also chopped in a way that makes it feel like a TV show. And by the time we actually get to the final act, almost nothing is paid off because there was no setup to it at the beginning. Songs in here are off, not as good as the first. The only reason this movie even made $1 billion is because of the first movie. Even though the first movie was nowhere near $1 billion, the Disney Plus train made it reach $1 billion. But the Disney Plus train made Moana 2 turn into Moana 2 because it was originally supposed to be a show. So, this movie crossed $1 billion. It would have made significantly more if the movie was actually as good as the original. But this shows even a bad movie under an IP can still make a lot of money, even if the movie's bad. But it could have made more money. And Moana 2 was just a huge disappointment. But these were the only 2 bad movies on this entire list. The rest of the ranking from here on out is movies at least an 8.5 out of 10. Everything below was at least a 4 out of 10, or under that. Everything from this point forward is going to be at least an 8.5 out of 10 or higher. This movie is just a gift to Mario fans. And I wish the plot wasn't as rushed, but just everything else is just an absolute gift to the Mario fans. And the animation is extremely detailed. They took their time animating everything. And then the Easter eggs in the back for the Mario fans, they added that all in the back too and took their time just adding every little Easter egg. Now the first 15 minutes of this movie kind of felt like an Illumination movie. How Illumination always has their style with their movies. And everyone was worried that this movie will follow that particular style in it. I feel like the first 15 minutes of this movie kind of fell under that style, but by the time the plot actually kicked in, we actually got into the Mario movie that everyone wanted. I'm curious to see what they do with the sequel, but the movie needs to be significantly longer. That's the big downside to this, but the movie itself is such a treat to Mario fans. Now, Barbenheimer was such a huge thing that happened back in 2023, and Oppenheimer was almost on this list, but the studio didn't push it out enough that it just barely landed under $1 billion. If you ask me, Barbie really made $1 billion just because of Barbenheimer. Now, you could debate that the movie could have made $1 billion anyways, but I feel like Barbenheimer certainly did help it reach that milestone of $1 billion. Now, if you ask me, the standout of this movie is easily Ryan Gosling as Ken. When it comes to I'm Just Ken, or just how he acts throughout the entire movie, he basically plays as Ken. For the people that weren't the target demographic for this movie, they could all agree that even Ryan Gosling was the standout of this movie. Now, I'm certainly not the target demographic for this movie. I did enjoy the humor in this movie. Some of the humor is pushing it too much for me, but other humor is like in that right ballpark that makes me enjoy it. And like I said, Ryan Gosling, huge standout of the movie. Deadpool and Wolverine are back. I'm glad this movie was the highest grossing R-rated movie of all time because it just deserved it. Deadpool is back, Hugh Jackman is back, and this is just that movie that the MCU needed. But if you ask me, I feel like Deadpool 1 and Deadpool 2 kind of have a unique style to it. They actually feel like a Deadpool movie, as this one, I don't really know how to describe it, but it kind of feels like a spin-off while also being connected. The director himself did say this is not Deadpool 3, so that makes sense. I also felt like that Wolverine story was a bit rushed. We're introduced to Wolverine, Deadpool picks him up from the bar, and then all of a sudden, Wolverine's just thrown into the story. I kind of wish there was a lot more plot ahead of time for Wolverine. I did like the reveal for the plot that they had at the end of the movie for his character, but I kind of wish we knew more about Wolverine by the time we actually saw him in the movie. But this is a movie for the fans, and Marvel absolutely delivered on that. Everyone did a great job with the movie, great song choices, and I'm glad that the general audience was able to come back to the MCU. It's just, does that hype carry for Captain America, Thunderbolts, and Fantastic Four by the time Avengers kicks in? Now, I'm sure most of us did scratch our heads when we heard that they were deciding to make an Inside Out 2, but they were able to make a sequel that was better than the original film. The movie was able to grow up with its audience. That the people who watched the original movie when they were like, I don't know, 8, 7, are now older, about teenage, and they're able to watch this movie connecting to it a lot more. They connected to the first movie, and they grew up, and again, connected to the second movie. This is a franchise that Pixar could continue to make sequels off of it, and not much people will be mad for consistently aging, so make Riley age consistently. A lot of people could connect more to these movies. You can continue to make a bunch of money with this franchise. The new emotions added into this movie are a great add. We got anxiety, ennui, envy, and embarrassment. And once they do make an Inside Out 3, because let's face it, Inside Out 3 is going to be made. This is the highest grossing animated movie of all time. I can't wait to see what new emotions they introduce, and I can't wait to see how these new emotions that they introduced in this movie are going to now feel like the main characters in the third movie. I just enjoyed so many more plot points in this movie than I did for the first one. Now, the first one, don't get me wrong, is still a great movie, but I feel like the second one connected to me a lot more than the first one did. And Riley also goes through a character arc in this movie. It's not just the emotions that do it, but we also get to see how Riley changes too. Not entirely told in the emotions perspective. After about 14 years, James Cameron's finally released the sequel to the highest grossing movie of all time, Avatar: The Way of Water. It was better than the first movie, and the CGI again is breathtaking, and this movie was able to introduce certain plot points that will come in later down the franchise, which I'm excited to check out. Yes, it's 3 hours, you're going to feel the runtime, but I feel like that is saved from just how in-depth the characters are and how immersed you are in the world. Because James Cameron does a good job at just immersing you in this world, which is why the movie costs so much to make, which is why the CGI looks so good, because he wants to immerse you in this world. He wants you to get invested in these characters, and he does that for the first one, and then it continues on to the second one. And let's hope it continues on to the third movie as well. Now, I wasn't the biggest fan of Top Gun Maverick when I first watched it. On rewatch is when the movie really kicked in for me. Now, the movie is predictable. This is probably one of the most predictable movies that is this popular in the past decade. But the theme of it is what hits. Without the theme of this movie, it wouldn't be the movie that it is. Without Tom Cruise in the movie, it still won't be the movie as it is, because you just have these amazing jet plane scenes that they spent years training for, and Tom Cruise, being Tom Cruise, always with his stunts, wants to actually do it. And then, because they did it, it looks phenomenal. And you're still just tense because you know it's real. So it's just keeping that suspense throughout it all. And when the plot does end, when the themes and characters' arcs are wrapped up, you feel satisfied. You feel emotion in your heart because you felt for the character and you understood his journey that he went through. And this movie deserved to be as popular as it was. But easily the best movie that made $1 billion this decade so far is Spider-Man No Way Home. This movie was such a treat to Spider-Man fans. The hype around this movie was real. Everywhere you saw was just Marvel fans hyping up this movie, that when the movie finally came out, you could definitely saw it at the box office. It's almost like back where Tobey Maguire movies were out, they planned this from the start. Because this movie does such a great job at just closing everything off. If it's just Tobey Maguire's character arcs, if it's his villains, or Andrew's, it all feels paid off, while also continuing Tom Holland's story. It's not all just fan service, there is still plot points in here that actually matter. And the movie does a good job at setting up on what's to come next for Spider-Man. Although we don't know what's going to come next for him, it does a good job at doing that. But with that, that was my ranking of all 9 movies that made $1 billion so far this decade. If you like this video, maybe leave us on the side of interest too. Like, subscribe, and see you guys next time. Goodbye.